Sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest loads, Jack Miller whispered to himself as he adjusted the worn leather straps over his shoulders, the sun rising low over the Montana prairie, casting golden light across the frost-touched fields. He had been hauling hay bales since before dawn, the scent of fresh-cut grass mingling with the crisp morning air, and each step on the uneven dirt path sent tiny clouds of dust swirling around his boots. Ahead, near the old wooden barn, a figure stood still among the stacks, her frame small against the towering bales, hands clasped together as if to steady her balance. Jack squinted, the sunlight glinting off strands of her chestnut hair, her posture rigid yet somehow graceful, and he noticed how quietly she observed him, the faintest hint of curiosity in her gray eyes. Without hesitation, he approached, lifting the first hay bale with ease, feeling the familiar strain in his arms and back but welcoming it, a rhythm he knew by heart from years of early mornings and tireless work. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice low but steady, carrying across the field in a calm invitation rather than a demand. She nodded slightly, the smallest flicker of a smile brushing her lips, though she didn't speak. Jack handed her the end of the bale, their fingers brushing for a brief instant, and there was a quiet acknowledgement in that touch, a silent agreement that they would carry this load together. The wind whispered across the prairie, lifting loose strands of hay into the air, and the distant clatter of a woodpecker echoed from a nearby fence post. Jack adjusted his grip on the next bale, shifting it from his shoulders with practiced precision, each movement deliberate, measured, like a man who had learned patience through countless seasons of labor. The woman followed, mirroring his pace as best she could, and he could sense the initial hesitation in her steps, the way she balanced carefully, uncertain of what to expect but trusting enough to stay in rhythm with him. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow cutting across the golden ground, and Jack allowed himself a small exhale, feeling the calm resolve settle over him like a warm cloak. "Almost there," he murmured, more to himself than to her, but the words carried, gentle and grounding. She nodded again, eyes flicking briefly to the horizon where the barn door waited to receive the bales, unaware of the hidden significance of this quiet partnership. For Jack, it was just another morning of work, another task to be completed with dignity and care, but beneath the surface of the routine, something unspoken hovered between them, a subtle, almost imperceptible recognition that this simple act of shared effort, this unassuming kindness, might ripple far beyond the bounds of the sunlit field. And as they lifted the final bale together, their movements synchronized in quiet harmony, Jack caught the faintest glimmer of emotion in her gaze, a mixture of surprise and gratitude, not knowing that she carried a secret far greater than the weight of the hay itself, a legacy of wealth and influence hidden behind her unassuming presence, waiting for the day when the truth would reveal itself and leave both of their worlds forever changed. The morning light shifted slowly over the Montana plains, painting the weathered barn in soft amber hues that warmed the dusty air. Jack Miller stepped back for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow and adjusting the worn canvas gloves on his hands. The rhythm of lifting and carrying hay had become a steady cadence, almost meditative, and the quiet presence of Emily Thornton beside him added a subtle comfort he could not quite name. She moved with careful precision, each bale she held reflecting a mix of curiosity and uncertainty, and Jack noticed how her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the unfamiliarity of honest, physical labor. He offered a small smile, one that carried encouragement rather than condescension, and she returned it with a tentative nod. The wind rustled through the tall grass surrounding the barn, carrying the scent of hay and earth, and somewhere in the distance a creek gurgled gently, completing the serene soundscape of the early morning. Jack shifted his stance and gestured toward a particularly large bale, heavier than the others, and Emily hesitated, eyes widening slightly. "I can take it from here," Jack said softly, his voice steady and calm, "we can do this together." Her breath caught ever so slightly, and she tilted her head, as if listening for hidden meaning, yet she did not speak. Slowly, she reached forward and took hold of the bale, her fingers brushing against his, and for a fleeting moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition of trust and shared effort. Jack guided her movements with quiet patience, his voice a low thread weaving instruction and reassurance into the rhythm of their work. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the wooden beams of the barn and illuminating motes of dust dancing in the golden light. Emily began to match his pace more confidently, her movements less hesitant, and Jack allowed himself a subtle satisfaction, not from the completion of the task, but from witnessing her quiet transformation. He noted the glint of something delicate on her hand, perhaps a ring, and a faint flicker of curiosity passed through his mind, yet he chose to remain focused on the work at hand, respecting her silence and the unspoken boundaries she maintained. A soft breeze carried the distant call of a meadowlark, and Jack inhaled deeply, letting the crisp Montana air fill his lungs, grounding him in the moment. Emily adjusted her grip, eyes momentarily meeting his with a hint of acknowledgement, a brief connection forged through shared effort and patience. The sweat on their foreheads and the strain in their arms were minor details compared to the quiet dignity that seemed to emanate from the simple act of helping one another, and Jack felt a warmth settle in his chest, a recognition that this morning, this task, and this unexpected companionship carried more significance than either of them realized. As they set the final bale down against the stack, Emily stepped back, brushing strands of hair from her face, and Jack noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor, a small but unmistakable spark of confidence and trust. The barn stood still around them, the only sounds the settling of hay and the soft exhale of wine through the wooden slats. Jack straightened, hands on his hips, and allowed a brief moment to simply observe, the two of them framed by sunlight and shadows, the quiet rhythm of shared labor marking the start of something unspoken, a connection that neither needed to name, yet both could feel growing, delicate and strong, under the wide Montana sky. Jack Miller paused for a moment, setting down the last hay bale and wiping the sweat from his forehead, the morning sun now climbing higher in the sky, casting long, warm rays across the barn floor. Emily Thornton stepped back, her hands brushing lightly against her apron as she adjusted her footing, her gray eyes watching Jack with quiet interest and a hint of admiration she did not yet understand. The gentle creak of the barn doors swinging in the breeze and the soft rustle of hay shifting in the stacks filled the space between them, a calm rhythm that seemed to slow the world around them. Jack gestured toward the next stack of bales, nodding slightly as if to invite her forward without words, and she hesitated for only a moment before moving in step with him, carrying the first of the next set with careful, deliberate movements. He kept his voice low and steady, offering simple encouragement, "Take it slow, we will get through this together." The sound of his words, calm and measured, seemed to put her at ease, and the small smile that briefly touched her lips reflected an emerging trust that Jack had rarely seen in someone so reserved. The scent of fresh hay and the warm wood of the barn mingled with the crisp prairie air, wrapping around them like a quiet embrace, and Jack felt the subtle satisfaction of being present in a moment where effort and patience were enough, where no accolades or recognition were required to affirm the value of what they were doing. Emily adjusted her stance, lifting the bale with steadier hands, and Jack moved beside her, guiding her lightly, his gestures unobtrusive but precise, a silent acknowledgement that they were working in tandem. A hawk glided overhead, its shadow skimming across the sunlit field, and the distant hum of a tractor in the far pasture punctuated the stillness, reminding them of the larger world beyond the barn walls. Jack caught the flicker of sunlight glinting off a delicate bracelet on Emily's wrist, a subtle hint of the life and status she kept carefully hidden, and he chose not to comment, allowing the quiet to deepen the connection without distraction. Their movements fell into a steady rhythm, each bale lifted and stacked with the care of two people who had begun to anticipate each other's motions, a silent choreography of mutual respect and shared endeavor. As they reached the top of the final stack, Jack stepped back, hands on his hips, breathing steadily, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the weight of the hay forgotten, replaced by a quiet recognition of the trust and cooperation they had built. Emily's eyes held a soft, unspoken gratitude, and Jack felt the warmth of satisfaction that came not from completion but from knowing that an ordinary morning had become something quietly extraordinary. The barn settled around them, the air still except for the soft whisper of wine through the open doors, carrying with it the promise that this simple act of kindness, this shared labor, might resonate far beyond the walls of the old structure, a subtle prelude to the unexpected moments that awaited them both. The breeze shifted gently through the open barn doors, carrying the subtle scent of pine from the distant hills and the warmth of the morning sun, which now painted long, soft shadows across the hay-strewn floor. Jack Miller adjusted his grip on the next bale, feeling the familiar strain in his shoulders but welcoming it as a reminder of the rhythm he had mastered over years of early mornings and honest work. Emily Thornton followed closely, her movements more confident now, and Jack could see a small change in her posture, a subtle ease in the way she handled the weight, though her eyes remained watchful and reflective. He spoke softly, not to correct but to guide, steady now, one step at a time. His tone was calm, carrying an unspoken reassurance that it was safe to trust the rhythm of the work and the quiet strength in shared effort. The light flickered across the wooden beams, catching in the strands of Emily's hair, and for a moment Jack allowed himself to notice the small details, the way she shifted her weight, the careful attention in her eyes, and the unspoken diligence that mirrored his own. Around them, the barn settled into a tranquil cadence, the faint creak of boards underfoot, the gentle swish of hay settling, and the distant chirp of birds in the surrounding fields creating a peaceful soundtrack to their labor. Jack handed her the end of a particularly heavy bale, and their fingers met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of cooperation and mutual respect. Emily responded with a subtle nod, a quiet affirmation that she was willing to continue alongside him, and Jack felt a surge of gratitude for this shared effort that transcended words. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light through the gaps in the barn walls, illuminating specks of dust that floated lazily in the air. Each tiny particle catching the light and adding to the serene atmosphere. Jack took a moment to breathe deeply, savoring the calm strength in the simplicity of the morning and the quiet connection forming between them. Emily adjusted her stance and lifted her bale with a steadier rhythm, and Jack walked beside her, keeping his movements deliberate and unhurried, offering guidance through presence rather than instruction. The work continued, steady and unbroken, and Jack allowed himself to appreciate the unspoken trust developing, the sense of dignity in honest labor, and the quiet patience that came from working together without need for applause or recognition. As they approached the final stack for the morning, Jack caught a fleeting glance of something delicate on Emily's wrist, a hint of elegance that contrasted with the humble setting of the barn, and he smiled softly, respecting her privacy while acknowledging the quiet surprise of the revelation yet to come. The last bale was set into place, and for a moment, neither spoke, only the soft shuffle of feet and the settling of hay filling the space. Jack stepped back, letting his shoulders relax, and Emily looked toward him, her expression softening, a subtle warmth in her eyes that spoke of trust and appreciation, a silent testament to the power of small acts and quiet companionship. The barn, bathed in sunlight and shadow, held them in a gentle stillness, a pause in time that felt full of promise and the unspoken potential of something quietly extraordinary unfolding. A sudden gust of wind blew across the Montana fields, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and stirring loose strands of hay that had settled on the barn floor. Jack Miller adjusted the sleeves of his worn flannel shirt, rolling them up slightly as he surveyed the next set of bales, feeling the comforting weight of the day's labor settle into a rhythm he knew well. Emily Thornton stood beside him, her movements now fluid and sure, the hesitancy from earlier replaced by a quiet determination that mirrored Jack's own steady composure. He reached down, lifting a particularly large bale with practiced ease, and gestured toward her to take the other end. She nodded, eyes flicking briefly to the distant horizon where the mountains met the sky, and then she met his gaze with a tentative smile, an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared effort. "We will get through this together," Jack said softly, his voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that encouraged focus without pressure. Emily adjusted her grip, leaning into the weight with careful precision, and Jack could sense the subtle shift in her confidence, the way she now anticipated the movements rather than following them. The sunlight streamed through the gaps in the barn walls, casting long, warm shadows across the floor, illuminating the tiny particles of hay floating in the air, each glinting like gold in the light. Jack took a slow breath, feeling the satisfaction that came not from the completion of the task but from the collaboration, the quiet connection formed through shared effort and respect. A distant woodpecker tapped rhythmically on a fence post, a soft harmony to the shuffle of boots and the settling of hay, creating a serene soundtrack that wrapped the moment in stillness. Emily's eyes lingered on Jack for just a second longer than necessary, a flicker of gratitude that went beyond words, and Jack responded with the faintest nod, recognizing the weight of unspoken trust and acknowledgement between them. As they maneuvered the final bale into place, their movements synchronized in an almost silent dance of cooperation, the calm diligence of two people working in tandem creating a sense of quiet triumph. Jack stepped back, hands resting on his hips, and allowed a brief pause, the warm light casting both of them in soft relief, revealing the subtle bond that had formed through patience, attention, and the shared rhythm of labor. Emily adjusted the position of her hair, tucking a loose strand behind her ear, and Jack noticed the glimmer of something delicate on her wrist, a subtle reminder that the life she led beyond this barn was far removed from the quiet simplicity of the moment. Yet in this space, in this shared exertion, titles and wealth mattered little. The air was thick with a sense of accomplishment, not loud or boastful, but the gentle affirmation of character and integrity in action. As the morning continued, they moved in quiet harmony, lifting, stacking, and adjusting each bale with care, and Jack felt a deepening awareness that these small acts of cooperation, this patience and dignity, were planting seeds that might grow into something far more meaningful than either of them could foresee. The barn, bathed in soft sunlight and filled with the scents and sounds of labor, held them in a suspended stillness, a delicate balance of effort, trust, and the quiet promise of connection. Emily Thornton paused mid-step, adjusting her grip on the hay bale with careful precision, and Jack Miller observed her silently, noting the subtle confidence that had grown in her movements since the morning began. The light streaming through the barn slats shifted with the passage of time, painting the floor in a warm mosaic of gold and amber, and the air carried the faint, sweet scent of freshly cut hay mixed with the crisp Montana breeze. Jack exhaled slowly, the deep rhythm of the labor calming his thoughts, and he could feel the quiet satisfaction that came from seeing someone learn, adapt, and trust in the simplicity of honest effort. Emily's eyes flickered to a distant corner of the barn where a small stack of tools and a weathered lantern rested, and Jack sensed the unspoken story behind her gaze, the curiosity about a world far different from the routine of lifting and carrying hay. He offered her a gentle nod, not to instruct, but to affirm that her participation was valued and that she was seen, quietly and respectfully. The barn settled into a serene cadence around them, the soft shuffle of their boots, the faint creak of the wooden beams, and the occasional chirp of a bird outside combining into a gentle symphony of rural life. Emily lifted the next bale with ease, her hands steady, and Jack moved alongside her, allowing a subtle guidance with his posture and positioning, their movements synchronized without a single word exchanged. The sunlight flickered across her hair, catching in the strands and revealing a glimmer of elegance, a small hint of the life she kept hidden beyond the confines of the barn, and Jack chose to observe silently, respecting the quiet dignity of her presence. He could sense a subtle shift in the energy between them, a bond forming not through grand gestures but through the shared rhythm of labor, the patient repetition of stacking and aligning each bale, and the acknowledgement of mutual effort that required no applause or recognition. Emily glanced at him briefly, eyes meeting his with a quiet trust that was as unspoken as it was powerful, a fleeting smile brushing her lips that spoke of appreciation and an emerging comfort in the moment. The warmth of the sun continued to bathe the barn in soft light, dust motes dancing lazily in the air, each one catching the glow like tiny sparks, and Jack felt the moment stretch, the silence between them imbued with a gentle understanding, a recognition that the act of helping, of being present, was creating something meaningful beyond the physical task. As they reached the final bale for this set, Jack stepped back, shoulders relaxed, breathing evenly, and allowed a pause, letting the stillness of the barn and the quiet companionship they had cultivated linger, a subtle promise of connection and trust that neither needed to voice. Emily adjusted her stance, a faint blush coloring her cheeks in the warm sunlight, and Jack could sense that beneath the simplicity of the work, beneath the calm exterior, a quiet acknowledgement had formed between them, an invisible bond forged in patience, cooperation, and shared dignity that might influence the days to come in ways neither could yet imagine. Jack Miller took a slow, deliberate step back, resting his hands on his knees for a brief moment, feeling the warmth of the Montana sun spill across his back and the subtle ache of steady labor in his shoulders. Emily Thornton paused beside him, catching her breath, and he noticed the slight rise and fall of her chest, the quiet determination in her gray eyes that had grown stronger with each bale they had lifted together. The barn was hushed now except for the occasional whisper of wine through the cracks in the wooden walls and the soft shuffle of hay settling under their weight, a gentle soundtrack that made each movement feel measured and deliberate. Jack offered a small, reassuring smile, not in a way that demanded acknowledgement but in a way that simply affirmed her presence and effort. "Almost done with this section," he said, his voice carrying lightly over the space between them, calm yet inviting. Emily nodded, lifting the next bale with steady hands, the ease in her movements reflecting the trust she had developed over the morning. Jack moved beside her, guiding subtly, showing rather than telling, letting the shared rhythm of lifting, carrying, and stacking create a sense of quiet partnership. The sunlight fell in soft slanted beams through the barn doors, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air, giving the space a sense of stillness and grace, as though time itself had slowed to observe their cooperation. Jack noticed the gentle shift in Emily's demeanor, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly and her posture straightened, the small signs of confidence emerging through physical effort and trust. He took a deep breath, savoring the simplicity of the moment, the feeling that meaningful connection could arise without words, without grandeur, simply through patience, dignity, and shared labor. Emily glanced at him for a brief instant, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them that carried unspoken gratitude and a budding respect, small yet profound. The barn seemed to hold its breath with them, the world outside reduced to the warm sunlight, the scent of hay, and the faint rustle of grass in the distance, emphasizing the quiet intimacy of mutual effort. Jack lifted the final bale of this row, their movements now completely synchronized, and together they set it into place with a quiet satisfaction, not spoken but felt, a shared accomplishment that resonated deeper than the physical act itself. He allowed himself a subtle smile, noticing the soft glimmer in Emily's eyes as she looked toward the horizon, the unspoken hint of curiosity about the world beyond the barn and the unacknowledged significance of this shared morning. The air was calm and steady, filled with the promise of possibility, the quiet dignity of labor, and the gentle awareness that these small moments of collaboration and patience were planting the seeds for a connection neither had yet named, but both were beginning to feel growing in the warmth of Montana sunlight. Emily Thornton stepped back slightly, her hands resting lightly on the final hay bale they had just positioned, and Jack Miller observed the subtle shift in her posture, the way her shoulders had straightened and her gaze now carried a quiet self-assurance that had not been there at the start of the morning. The sunlight streamed through the barn's wide-open doors, casting long, golden beams across the wooden floor and highlighting the tiny dust motes that drifted lazily in the air, each one catching the light like a fragment of warmth suspended in time. Jack took a deep breath, the scent of fresh hay and the Montana prairie mingling in the crisp morning air, and felt the calm satisfaction that came from shared effort and mutual respect, the simple dignity of honest work performed together. Emily glanced at him for a fleeting moment, her expression softening, and Jack could see the flicker of acknowledgement, a subtle recognition of the patience and care he had shown, as well as a growing trust that needed no words to be understood. He gestured toward the open doorway, where the wind carried the gentle rustle of distant trees and the faint murmur of a creek beyond the fields, and Emily followed his gaze, absorbing the quiet beauty of the morning while remaining attentive to the task that had brought them together. As they moved a few more bales into place, Jack's guidance was minimal, more a presence than instruction, allowing Emily to adjust and anticipate the rhythm herself, the cooperation flowing seamlessly, a dance of shared purpose. The barn walls were bathed in sunlight, each plank and beam catching the light differently, creating a mosaic of warm tones that framed the two of them in a serene tableau, the simplicity of the scene magnifying the subtle intimacy of mutual effort. Emily's hands rested briefly on a bale, her eyes catching the faint glint of sunlight on a delicate bracelet, a hint of the hidden world she carried beyond the barn, and Jack chose to look away, respecting the privacy and quiet mystery she maintained. A soft breeze drifted through the open doors, lifting loose strands of hay into the air, and Jack felt the unspoken bond deepen, not through conversation, but through shared movement, patience, and the quiet acknowledgement of effort and presence. They paused, leaning lightly on their respective bales, the stillness between them filled with the warm hum of accomplishment, the gentle rhythm of their breathing, and the soft sounds of the Montana morning. Jack's gaze met Emily's again, and in that brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding, a sense of dignity and respect that transcended the labor itself, hinting at the potential for a connection that neither needed to define yet both could feel, a subtle promise lingering in the warm, sunlit barn, waiting to unfold naturally as their morning continued. Jack Miller stepped back from the final stack of hay bales, his hands resting lightly on his hips as the warm Montana sun bathed the barn in golden light, the long morning of labor leaving a comfortable ache in his shoulders and arms. Emily Thornton lingered beside him, her movements relaxed now, the earlier tension and hesitation replaced by a quiet confidence that mirrored the calm determination he carried throughout the day. The gentle creak of the barn's wooden beams and the faint shuffle of loose hay underfoot filled the space between them, punctuated by the distant song of meadowlarks and the soft whisper of wine through the open doors. Jack exhaled slowly, the rhythm of the labor and the shared effort settling into a soothing cadence, and he noticed the subtle glow of satisfaction in Emily's expression, a quiet acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. She shifted her weight, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and for the first time, her eyes lingered on him with a hint of curiosity and admiration that had not been present at the start of the morning. Jack felt a warmth in his chest, not from pride but from the simple recognition of shared human effort, the dignity and patient cooperation, and the unspoken respect that had grown between them over hours of quiet work. The sunlight streamed through the barn, highlighting the floating dust motes that seemed suspended in the warm air, and Jack allowed himself a brief moment to appreciate the beauty in ordinary labor, the subtle poetry in repetitive, mindful action, and the sense of connection forged in silence. Emily took a deep breath, her hands resting briefly on the final bale, and Jack could sense a shift in her posture, a gentle release of tension and the first glimmer of comfort in her surroundings. They exchanged a glance, unspoken but profound, a silent acknowledgement of mutual respect and the beginnings of trust that had been nurtured through effort rather than conversation. The barn itself seemed to settle around them, quiet and still, the golden light casting long shadows that intertwined with the soft warmth of the day, creating an atmosphere of calm reflection and gentle triumph. Jack adjusted his stance, feeling the subtle rhythm of the work lingering in his muscles, and allowed a moment of stillness, knowing that the morning's labor had built something far greater than stacks of hay, it had built a bridge of quiet understanding and respect. Emily's eyes wandered briefly to the horizon, the mountains bathed in soft light, and Jack could see a subtle spark of anticipation and wonder, as though the world beyond the barn held possibilities that this morning had quietly opened. As they began to step back toward the barn doors, the air seemed to hum with potential, the kind of quiet magic that comes from simple acts of patience, care, and shared humanity, leaving both of them with the lingering sense that something extraordinary had taken root in the ordinary, and that the seeds of trust and connection planted here would continue to grow in ways neither could yet foresee.